Have you ever cried in a room full of people, yet felt more alone than if you were on an island by yourself? Have you ever gasped for breath behind closed doors, holding your heart together with trembling hands, while the one who broke it walked freely, laughing, pretending nothing ever happened? There is a certain kind of cruelty in how some people hurt you, not with fists, but with silence, not with fire, but with coldness. And in that stillness, in that place where your soul was weeping, no one came, especially not the one who caused the tears. What makes this kind of betrayal more agonizing is not just the act, but the indifference. It's when someone sees your pain, hears your cries, watches you fall to pieces, and yet walks away without blinking. No remorse, no apology, no turning back. They left you to cry alone. And worse, they found comfort in your suffering. There was no shoulder offered, no embrace of empathy, just distance, just silence. But let me remind you of something divine. God was there when you cried, even if no one else noticed. Even when you were on your knees whispering prayers through broken sobs, God was there, taking note of every single tear. There is no wound so hidden that he cannot see it, no heartbreak so buried that he cannot feel it. While others turned their back on your sorrow, heaven leaned in to listen. You see, the world often forgets that God is a just witness. People may get away with lies, with manipulation, with cruelty, but not forever. God is patient, but he is not blind. There comes a time when the same pain you endured is echoed back to the one who caused it. Not because God is vengeful, but because he is fair. For every tear you cried in silence, there is a moment coming when they will cry too, in silence, in secret, with no one to hold them. That is not spite. That is balance. And perhaps the most haunting form of justice is this, when the one who once smiled at your tears finds themselves weeping with no hand to reach for, no soul to confide in, alone. The same silence they left you in will be the silence that surrounds them. So don't let bitterness eat you alive. You don't have to fight back. You don't have to prove your pain. You don't even have to wish for their suffering. Just heal. Just rise. Just know that life has a way of handing back what people thought they buried. What they sowed in your life, they will reap in theirs. When they cry in silence, when their soul aches with the same loneliness they handed you, do not gloat. Do not dance in their downfall. Let your peace be the proof that God handled what your heart could not. Because justice is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like a tear falling from the eye of the one who thought they were untouchable. And in that moment, heaven whispers, "Now you know what it felt like." There is a kind of weeping the world never sees. The kind that happens when the room is empty and you finally let go. The moment your voice cracks under the weight of words you can't speak out loud. When your pillow holds your grief because no shoulder was close enough. In that stillness, in that suffocating quiet, you felt abandoned, not just by people, but by everything that once felt safe. You may have asked yourself, does anyone see me? Does anyone care? And while the world kept turning and people kept walking, heaven stood still. God doesn't need noise to notice your sorrow. He doesn't need a stage to validate your suffering. The moment your heart broke in silence, the skies bore witness. The pain you could not explain was written across your soul like a silent prayer. And God read every word. Every single tear that slid down your face carried more than water. It carried injustice, confusion, betrayal, and the heaviness of being unseen. But you were seen, and more importantly, you were remembered. In moments when others dismissed your sadness as weakness, heaven recorded it as strength. You survived when you shouldn't have. You stood up when no one helped you rise. You smiled again when your soul was still mourning. Do you know how powerful that is? Not one moment of your agony escaped God's attention. He watched, not because he was distant, but because he was planning your healing. Your silent tears have power. They are not evidence of defeat. They are seeds in God's soil. And when the time is right, what was planted in pain will rise in purpose. Those tears watered your resilience. They made you tender, yes, but they also made you stronger than you realize. The person who wept alone became someone who now understands what true strength looks like, not in pretending, not in faking joy, but in surviving without applause. It's hard to believe sometimes, especially when the ones who hurt you seem to thrive. It feels like they walked away without consequences, while you were left with the wreckage. But remember this, God is not unjust. He doesn't forget the wounded. What you cried about in secret is still echoing in the chambers of heaven. And the silence that followed your weeping wasn't empty, it was sacred. It was the sound of God listening, waiting. One day the pain that once broke you will become the peace that defines you. And the silence that hurts so deeply will be the same silence in which God whispers, "I saw it all. I was always with you." When someone deliberately hurts you and walks away as if your emotions are meaningless, they often believe your pain is powerless. They interpret your silence as weakness. They see your gentleness as something to mock. But what they fail to realize is that silence is not surrender, and tears are not signs of defeat. You weren't weak when you wept. You were holy. You weren't powerless in pain. You were powerful in purity. And while they watched you crumble and found no guilt in their actions, God watched too. But not idly. He was taking notes. Not the kind of notes the world keeps, not statistics or social records, but divine documentation. Each act of betrayal, each word that shattered you, each smile they gave while your soul was falling apart. God saw it. God felt it. God remembered it, because unlike the people who looked past your brokenness, God leaned in. He marked every drop of your pain not as a moment of loss, but as evidence for the day justice would knock on their door. They thought you would never recover. They thought you would stay down. And in their arrogance, they mistook divine patience for divine absence. But nothing escapes the eye of God. The pain you endured was not in vain. It was an offering, a testimony, and in time it becomes the reason your enemies are brought low. There is a terrifying irony in thinking someone's tears mean nothing, because when God rises to respond to those tears, the very ones who laughed at your grief will be silenced by their own. They laughed when you were mourning. They pretended nothing happened when you were breaking. But there is a law written by the Creator himself. What you do to others, you do to yourself, and the pain they handed you so casually will return to them, delivered with divine precision, wrapped in silence, and weighted with the same loneliness they forced upon you. They will look for the same mercy they refused to give. They will long for the same compassion they denied. And when they cry behind closed doors, wondering why peace escapes them, they'll be tasting the same bitter silence they left you in. Not because you cursed them, not because you sought revenge, but because God, who loves justice, chose to answer your tears, not with words, but with action. And the ones who thought your pain was powerless will soon understand. Your tears had a witness, and that witness never forgets. There's a moment after betrayal where you no longer beg for explanation. You just sit quietly in the aftermath, wondering how someone who claimed to care could vanish when you needed them most. That moment becomes a graveyard of expectations. You stare into the dark, searching for light, but all you feel is abandonment. And the worst part? The one who caused your tears doesn't even look back. They keep moving, they keep smiling, as if your heart wasn't fractured behind them. But here's what they don't realize. In leaving you to cry alone, they weren't just hurting you. They were writing their own prophecy. The silence they handed you, the isolation they made you sit in, the loneliness they threw you into like it was nothing. That silence is a living thing, and it waits. It waits to grow. It waits to return. It waits until the very person who discarded you finds themselves in a room filled with people, but feels the crushing weight of being unseen, unheard, and unsupported. Because life always circles back. It has a strange and often painful symmetry. When someone walks away from your suffering, they think they've escaped responsibility, but they don't understand the law written in heaven's courtroom. What you abandon will visit you, and the silence they forced you to endure will echo in their future, when their soul begins to unravel and no one is near to gather the pieces. You may think your crying didn't matter. You may have told yourself that your tears were wasted, that no one noticed, but in truth, they mattered more than anything, because they exposed who truly stood with you and who never did. And those who turned their back on you didn't just walk away from a moment. They walked into a silence that now belongs to them, a silence that won't comfort, a silence that won't forget. There will come a day when they need the very support they refused to give. There will come a night when they ache for the empathy they once mocked. And no one will come, not because the world is cruel, but because they taught the world how to treat them by how they treated you. They trained their own fate to reflect their choices. God doesn't have to shout when he responds to pain. Sometimes he answers through absence, by removing comfort, by silencing the noise, by allowing a person to sit in the very void they created for others. And in that haunting quiet, they'll finally understand what you lived through. Not because you told them, not because they listened, but because the same silence they sowed in your life has finally come to reap in theirs. One of the hardest things to wrestle with is the delay of justice, especially when you're the one bleeding and the person holding the knife walks free. You watch them thrive while you barely survive. You hear their laughter while your chest still echoes from the sobs they caused. And every part of you wants to scream, "God, where are you? Why do the wicked prosper while the wounded perish?" But the nature of divine justice is not like the justice of man. It is not rushed. It does not seek drama. It is patient because it is perfect. God does not always strike in the moment of wrongdoing, not because he's overlooking your pain, but because he's orchestrating a response so precise, so undeniable, that when it comes, no one can claim it as coincidence. The world teaches us to act fast, to fight back, to show we're strong. But God often teaches in silence. He lets seasons pass so that the guilty have time to expose themselves fully, so that their masks fall off by their own choices. And while they think they're in control, while they believe your suffering is forgotten, he's writing the last chapter with a hand they cannot stop. When justice is delayed, it often feels like injustice. But in reality, it's preparation. God is not just preparing a response, he's preparing you. He's using your pain to build a strength within you that cannot be shaken. And when the time comes, when the tables turn, you won't just witness justice, you'll stand in peace while it unfolds. The people who left you hurting, The ones who watched your tears and still chose distance often think they've won, but they forget something eternal. God does not let wounds go unanswered. He is a healer, yes, but he is also a righteous judge, and what the world didn't punish, he will. You may not get an apology. You may never hear them admit their cruelty, but one day their own life will confront them. One day they'll sit in the quiet of their own heartbreak and wonder where everyone went. They'll cry out and silence will answer, not because you wished it upon them, but because divine justice always arrives, quiet, undeniable, and right on time. They believed that time would erase what they did, that as the days passed and the world kept spinning, the pain they caused would fade like a distant memory. They misunderstood your silence as surrender and your quiet endurance as weakness. But what they failed to see is that time doesn't erase truth, it reveals it. It uncovers hearts, it exposes intentions, and most of all, it sharpens consequences. For a while they lived as if nothing happened. They smiled in public, laughed with others, and convinced themselves they had moved on. But what they didn't realize was that while they were ignoring the damage, God was calculating the weight. He was watching their footsteps, measuring their choices, preparing a reckoning not based on anger, but based on righteousness. Time isn't always a healer. Sometimes it is a builder, slowly constructing the moment when what's been hidden is finally brought to light. And in that moment, the one who caused your sorrow will face something far more terrifying than guilt. They will face themselves. The person they became in order to hurt you will no longer be invisible. It will stare back at them in every sleepless night, in every unanswered prayer, in every broken relationship that follows. That's what time does in the hands of God. It doesn't forget. It unfolds. There is a unique kind of emptiness that follows betrayal. It doesn't arrive like a storm. It creeps in quietly, filling the spaces where love used to live. You wake up and suddenly the air feels heavier. You walk through your days and everything around you moves, but inside you feel like a ghost. You eat, but you're not nourished. You smile, but it doesn't reach your soul. That's what they left you with. A hollowness carved by their actions and their silence. They walked away, but they took something with them. And what they left behind wasn't just your broken heart. It was the absence of everything they once promised. They didn't just abandon you, they emptied you. And while they moved on with no visible scars, you were left in ruins, holding shattered trust and unanswered questions. The hardest part wasn't what they said, it was what they didn't. It was the way they could sleep soundly while you were staring at the ceiling, begging God for peace. They thought they'd escaped the consequences of their cruelty, but life has its own way of restoring balance. The emptiness they left in you is not forgotten by heaven. That void is not wasted. It becomes the mold from which their own isolation is formed, because eventually they will sit in a place that feels eerily familiar, a place where laughter doesn't reach their heart, where the people around them feel miles away, where conversations feel forced and love feels absent. They will feel alone, not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, deeply. What they created in you will return to them, not because you willed it, but because what we cause in others has a way of circling back. That's the nature of spiritual law. The heart you hollowed becomes the emptiness you inherit. The tears you dismissed become the sorrow that lives with you. The silence you enforced becomes your companion. They may post their smiles, they may wear the mask of joy, But when the noise dies down and the night falls, there will be no escape from the reality they're sitting in. The very isolation they threw you into will rise up like a shadow and wrap itself around their soul. And suddenly the world that once seemed so full will feel as barren as your heart once felt in their absence. Their punishment won't be loud. It won't come through others mocking them or enemies confronting them. It will come through the haunting quiet of a heart that knows it's alone, a soul that begins to realize it caused harm and finds itself unable to escape the echo of its own choices. That's what true isolation is. Not being alone in the world, but being alone with yourself when your conscience begins to speak. They will search for what they denied you. They will crave what they discarded, and the emptiness they once left in you will become the emptiness they carry, until they, too, are crying in silence, just like you once did. One of the greatest tests in your healing is accepting that you may never see the justice unfold. You may never witness their downfall. You may never be there when the tears finally break through their proud eyes. And that's hard, especially when you've suffered so deeply. When someone caused you pain and walked away without remorse, there's a part of you that naturally wants closure. You want to hear them say, "I'm sorry." You want to know they finally understand the hurt they inflicted. But healing doesn't always come wrapped in evidence. Sometimes it comes through trust. Trust that the same God who saw your pain also saw their actions. Trust that the same God who comforted you will confront them. And trust that just because you can't see their tears doesn't mean they're not crying. Just because they seem fine on the surface doesn't mean the storm isn't raging inside them. The truth is, people can hide a lot behind a smile. They can look composed while crumbling, and the same way you once masked your pain in silence, they too will find themselves doing the same. But the difference? You cried from innocence, they will cry from guilt. And guilt carries a weight that cannot be shaken. It grows in the quiet, in the still moments when distractions fade. It speaks louder than voices. It interrupts sleep. It makes peace feel impossible. You don't need to chase justice. You don't need to check if they're suffering. You don't need to force closure. That's not your burden anymore. When you let go and trust the hands of God, you release yourself from the obsession of knowing. Because knowing doesn't heal you. Trust does. Peace comes not from witnessing their pain, but from believing that God's justice never fails. And what if their tears never reach your ears? What if their cries are behind closed doors? That's okay, because God hears them the same way He heard yours, the same way He counted every tear that fell from your eyes without an audience. He will count theirs. And those tears won't be from love lost or chances missed. They'll be from the collision of their own choices finally catching up. To walk forward, not because they cried, but because you don't have to anymore. Let your healing be your testimony, not their suffering. You don't need to see their tears, but you can rest in the quiet knowing the time will come when they too will cry in silence. And in that silence they'll meet the same loneliness they gave to you. There's something sacred about rising from pain. Not loudly, not with vengeance, but quietly, gracefully, and with unwavering strength. You may not have realized it while you were in the depths of sorrow, but your healing has been speaking louder than your hurt ever could. Every time you chose to keep moving despite the ache, every time you smiled even when your heart wasn't ready, every time you reached for peace instead of retaliation, you were becoming the living proof that pain does not have the final word. The people who hurt you may never admit their wrongdoing. They may never return to say the words you deserve. But that's not where your story ends. Your life itself becomes the message. The way you rebuild, the way you grow, the way you shine after all that darkness. They are forced to watch what they could not destroy, and nothing haunts the heart of the one who inflicted pain more than seeing the one they tried to break, walking in unshakable purpose. Because deep inside them, whether they speak it or not, there's a discomfort that begins to grow. They see your peace, and it confronts their guilt. They witness your restoration, and it magnifies their own collapse. They remember your tears, not because you reminded them, but because now they know what it feels like to cry with no comfort, to sit in silence with no one to blame but themselves. That's the power of healing. It not only lifts you, it reveals them. Your healing doesn't need to prove anything. It just needs to exist. That's enough, because while you were crying alone, they thought you were weak. But in reality, you were being remade. And now that you're whole again, now that your spirit breathes without heaviness, their own conscience begins to suffocate. That's the echo of justice. That's the quiet reversal. You don't need to expose them. You don't need to post your healing or parade your strength. Just live. Just rise. Just heal. Because your healing will speak in places your voice never reached. And those who once laughed at your pain will find themselves haunted by your peace. They will cry, not because you forced it, but because life has a way of showing us what we've done through the mirror of our own emptiness. So walk in your testimony. Let your scars shine without shame, because every healed wound is proof of divine presence. Every breath you take in joy is proof that silence didn't win. God saw your tears. He saw their actions, and now both have a harvest. Yours is healing, theirs is reckoning. To the one who cried alone and wondered if anyone saw, yes, heaven saw. To the one who was broken in silence and questioned if it mattered, yes, it mattered. You were never truly alone. Every tear, every ache, every silent prayer reached the heart of a just and righteous God. And while the world moved on, while the one who hurt you seemed untouched, God was already writing a different ending. This is not the end of your story. It's the turning point. The tears you shed became seeds in divine soil. The silence you endured became the space where God began his deepest work. And while you were healing, he was preparing a justice so quiet, so precise, that when it arrives, it will not need your words. It will speak for itself. And for those who caused your pain, who walked away as you cried and never turned back, the silence they gave will now become their reality, not because you wished for it, but because truth always returns to its sender. The emptiness they created will visit them, the same way sorrow once visited you. But don't wait for their tears. Don't tie your peace to their pain. Your healing is your victory. Your strength is your justice. Let God finish what he started. And as you move forward, remember, the most powerful revenge is peace. The loudest justice is your joy. And the most undeniable truth is this: God let you cry in silence, but he never let it go unseen. Now he will let them cry in silence, not as punishment, but as revelation. What was done in darkness will be dealt with in light, and what was meant to destroy you will become the very evidence of who God is. Keep walking. The silence is shifting, and this time it's not yours, it's theirs.